250R. I'm Amy Goodman with Anjali Kamat.
We spend the rest of the hour with acclaimed Indian writer and activist Arundhati Roy on the dark underbelly of India, a country that prides itself on being known as the world's largest democracy. Earlier this month, when Forbes published its annual list of the world's billionaires, the Indian press reported with some delight that 2 of their countrymen had made it to the coveted list of the 10 richest individuals in the world. Meanwhile, thousands of Indian paramilitary troops and police are fighting a war against some of its poorest inhabitants living deep in the country's so-called tribal belt. Indian officials say more than a third of the country, mostly mineral-rich forest land, is partially or completely under the control of Maoist rebels, also known as Naxalites. India's Prime Minister has called the Maoists the country's gravest internal security threat. According to official figures, nearly 6,000 people have died in the past 7 years of fighting, more than half of them civilians. The government's new paramilitary offensive against the Maoists has been dubbed Operation Green Hunt. Well, earlier this month, the leader of the Maoist insurgency, Kureshwar Rao or Kishanji, invited the Booker Prize-winning novelist Arundhati Roy to mediate in peace talks with the government. Soon after, India's Home Secretary, G.K. Pillai, criticized Roy and others who have publicly called state violence against Maoists, quote, genocidal.
If the Maoists are murderers, please call them Maoists are murderers. Why is it that the Maoist murders in West Midnapur last year from June to December, 159 innocent civilians? I don't see any criticism of that. I can call it 159. If government have done it, a lot of you would have gone and said it's genocide. Why is that not genocide by the Maoists?
Well, Arundhati Roy recently had a rare journalistic encounter with the armed guerrillas in the forests of central India. She spent a few weeks traveling with the insurgency deep in India's Maoist heartland and wrote about their struggle in a 20,000-word essay published this weekend in the Indian magazine Outlook. It's called Walking with the Comrades. We're joined now here in New York by the world-renowned author and global justice activist. She won the Lannan Foundation Cultural Freedom Prize in 2002 and is the author of a number of books, including the Booker Prize-winning novel The God of Small Things. Her latest collection of essays, published by Haymarket, is Field Notes on Democracy, Listening to Grasshoppers. Arundhati Roy, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you.
Before we go into this very interesting journey you took, you arrive here on the 7th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. You were extremely outspoken on the war and have continued to be. I remember seeing you at Riverside Church with the great Howard Zinn giving a speech against the war. What are your thoughts now, 7 years in, and how it's affected your continent, how it's affected India?
Well, I think the saddest thing is that when the American elections happened and you had all the rhetoric of change you can believe in, and even the most cynical of us watched Obama win the elections and did feel moved, watching how happy people were, especially people who had lived through the civil rights movement and so on. And, in fact, what has happened is that he has come in and expanded the war. He won the Nobel Peace Prize and took an opportunity to justify the war. It was as though those tears of the black people who watched, a black man come to power were now cut and paste into the eyes of the world's elite watching him justify war. And from where I come from, it's almost... You think that they probably don't even understand what they're doing, the American government. They don't understand what kind of ground they stand on. When you say things like we have to wipe out the Taliban, what does that mean? The Taliban is not a fixed number of people. The Taliban is an ideology that has sprung out of a history that America created anyway. Iraq, the war is going on. Afghanistan obviously is rising up in revolt. It's spilled into Pakistan, and from Pakistan into Kashmir and into India. So we're seeing this superpower in a way caught in quicksand with a conceptual inability to understand what it's doing, how to get out or how to stay in. It's going to take this country down with it, for sure, you know. And I think it's a real pity that, in a way, at least George Bush was so almost obscene in his stupidity about it, whereas here it's smoke and mirrors, and people find it more difficult to decipher what's going on. But in fact, the war has expanded.
And Arundhati, how would you explain India's role in the expanding U.S. war in Afghanistan and Pakistan? This is a climate of very good relations between India and the United States.
Well, India's role is one of, at the moment, trying to position itself, as it keeps saying, as the natural ally of Israel and the U.S. And India is trying very hard to maneuver itself into a position of influence in Afghanistan. And personally, I believe that the American government would be very happy to see Indian troops in Afghanistan. It cannot be done openly because it would just explode, you know. So there are all kinds of ways in which they are trying to create a sphere of influence there. So the Indian government is deep into the great game, you know, there. And of course, the result is, you know, attacks in Kashmir, in Mumbai, not directly related to Afghanistan, but of course it's a whole history of this kind of maneuvering that's going on.
For an American audience, and perhaps for an audience just outside of the region, if you could really talk to us about an area you've been focusing a great deal on, of course, and that is Kashmir. Most people here know it as a sweater. That's what they think of when they hear Kashmir. So starting there, if you can tell us what is going on there, even place it for us geographically.
Okay. Well, Kashmir, as they say in India, you know, it's the unfinished business in the partition of India and Pakistan. So, as usual, it was a gift of British colonialism, you know. They threw it at us as they walked, I mean, as they withdrew. So Kashmir used to be an independent kingdom with a Muslim majority ruled by a Hindu king. And at the time of partition in 1947, as there was, you know, as you know, almost 1 million people lost their lives because this line that was drawn between India and Pakistan passed through villages and passed through communities, and as Hindus fled from Pakistan and Muslims fled from India, there was massacre on both sides. And at that time, oddly enough, Kashmir was peaceful. But then, when all the independent princedoms in India and Pakistan were asked to actually accede either to India or Pakistan, but Kashmir, the king was undecided, and that indecision resulted in, you know, Pakistani troops and non-official combatants coming in, and the king fled to Jammu, and then he acceded to India. But you know, there was already a movement for democracy within Kashmir at that time. Anyway, that's the history. But subsequently, there's always been a struggle for independence or self-determination there, which in 1989 became an armed uprising and was put down militarily by India. And today, the simplest way of explaining the scale of what's going on is that the U.S. has 165,000 troops in Iraq, but the Indian government has 700,000 troops in the Kashmir Valley, I mean in Kashmir, security forces, you know, holding down a place with military might. And so it's a military occupation.
We're going to break and then come back to your travels in Kashmir. Arundhati Roy, award-winning Indian writer, renowned global justice activist. Her new book is a book of essays. It's called Field Notes on Democracy, Listening to Grasshoppers. She's here in the United States for just a little while. Stay with us.